Welcome back to the Novelty Podcast, where we read tea and talk about books.
We also drink tea.
We read tea and talk about books. We read tea leaves. We've gotten into the occult lately, guys.
That's where we were going with that, in case you were wondering.
No, we drink tea and we talk about books. My name is Alexandra, and I read from the perspective of what does the reader owe the book?
And my name is Emily, and I read from the perspective of what the writer owes the reader.
Yes. So tell me, what are you drinking today, Emily?
I am just going old school here. I have Twinings English breakfast tea with some cream and honey. I just need some comfort tea today, and this is some comfort tea.
I needed to pick me up, so I have a caffeinated latte, beautifully made by my friend Emily right here. She made it for me.
We do have a milk frother. We feel very fancy.
Yeah, it's very nice. So before we dive into the meat of this episode, because this episode is meaty.
It is meaty.
We have a lot to talk about. It's a topic that's I find really interesting, and I don't think enough people talk about it. So I'm just going to tease the audience a little bit. But before we get into that, we did want to talk a little bit about other content we have on the internet. If you like us and you want to see more from us,
we have more.
What are some of the projects you're working on? Where can they find you?
I am now running and have almost run for a full year now, my own webtoons comic called It's a Working Dog's Life. It is the story of my dog, who you occasionally hear announcing herself on this podcast.
Yeah.
We are invading her space to do this.
Yeah, and all of the links for everything are in the description box down below.
You can find it down in the description. So I'd really love it if you stop by and then enjoyed some time with Casey.
Yeah.
Also, I'm pretty much everywhere on socials at Rose. I'm going to excuse my own name. Here we go. At Rose Red Studios. Mm-hmm. So, and it's red as in READ.
Yeah. So it's a little pun there. Rose Red from the fairy tale Rose Red. She's read some books.
Just a few.
And then studios, because it obviously incorporates your artistic side as well.
We are doing some art. Yeah. So I now have a YouTube channel where I talk about writing and
story creating,
how I create comics, all this fun stuff. Just whatever strikes the fancy. So
all your creative endeavors.
You have a lot of extra content too. You have years of extra content.
Yeah. So if you're here on the podcast and you don't watch on the YouTubes, the podcast also goes up on YouTube along with my other YouTube content at A Lovely Jaunt. I'm at A Lovely Jaunt everywhere, on TikTok, on Storygraph, on Instagram. And so you can find all of my content there if you're interested.
A lot. It's really lots of meaty
conversations
about books and literature, and I know a lot of people have used your content to help them in like college classes.
That's
and stuff.
True, and boy, is that flattering. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, so, someone asked to quote me in papers a couple times, so I was like, what the hell?
So if you need help in that, or you just want to learn some more about literature, check out A Lovely Jaunt.
Yeah, you want me to hear me whinge some more about modern literature and how it's not good enough. It could be better. Then we can do that.
We highly recommend the video on, is it Bunny?
Yeah, Bunny. One's my most popular video, and it has the most robust conversation in the comments too. So I'm consistent in defending my position. That's okay.
As you should be.
Yeah.
It's your channel.
It's my channel, and it's my opinion. So for today, to get into, this is really a continuation of a thought that you and I have been wrestling with. We're a dog with a bone on this one.
This has been our 2025.
Yes, and when you guys hear it, you'll probably understand why this particular context is really bringing this to the fore. But it's really dealing with this idea of how propaganda is functioning in the things that we read. And we talked about it from the perspective of how we see authors propagandizing through their works.
Right.
And we talked about it with Akatar. We keep referencing it because it was quite a revelation to my own thinking.
Yeah, that was an experience.
Yeah. And then we also most recently talked about it in our last month's episode where we were discussing how Westerns have worked as a genre for readers and the ways in which it can serve a propagandistic purpose. Today, we're kind of transitioning to how, as a reader, as a critic, as an interpreter of literature, you can propagandize also through that by sort of defining how things mean, what they mean, what is true, what is real. You can use this same lens and framework of propaganda to re-propagandize either yourself or your community.
Right. When you're out there encountering literature.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thesis, everybody. It's not short and sweet, but that's the thesis we're working with.
And in case you're wondering, why am I here? What am I getting out of this? To start with, if you just want to know how crazy people get about books on the internet, buckle up.
Yeah. So there was a podcast that you used to listen to quite a bit.
Yes.
Did you decide if you want to name them or not?
I'm going to name them because they decided to go out on the limb and publicly state these things. So, you know.
And if they ever run across this video or this podcast, which we're not huge, then they can have the right to defend themselves.
Right, exactly.
You know, we can have an open conversation.
And I will say, like, the reason I listened to this podcast for a while is that there was content that I really enjoyed in it. The podcast is called Close Reads, and it was a group, S3 hosts, who themselves, I think 2 of them at least, were teachers.
Yeah.
And they basically would read a piece of classical literature over the course of like 5 or 6 episodes, and then they would analyze it as they go. And again, there was a lot of content that I enjoyed, but I noticed this thread that consistently showed up of when they encountered either an author or a piece of work that was contrary to their very, very strongly held worldview, things kind of started to unravel.
Yeah, it's almost like we needed to fudge it
so bad
and sort of squish it and make it fit the accepted narrative.
Right. So like I think one of like the best examples is their series on Flannery O'Connor, which I actually enjoyed their analysis of Flannery O'Connor. But one of the hosts was talking about how growing up, she refused to read Flannery O'Connor because Flannery O'Connor is Catholic, and she had been told all sorts of terrible things about Catholics. And then she went to college, and Flannery O'Connor was an assigned reading, so she, had to do this. And as she's reading these books, she like on air is talking about how she was thinking to herself, well, this isn't what I was taught Catholics are like. This is really good. Goes against what I was taught Catholics. Instead of going through that thought process and thinking, maybe what I was taught was wrong, she instead decides that Flannery O'Connor isn't really a Catholic. She makes up, I don't know if she specifically made up this term or if other people made it up and she just glommed onto it, that Flannery O'Connor must have been a medieval Catholic.
This is a common idea, which, in the twists and turns of Protestant, Christian, Catholic history, when from a Protestant perspective, when someone's trying to bring a Catholic person into the fold to make them acceptable, if they have a strict view about not accepting them as being part of their acceptable sect of Christianity, they'll refer to them as medieval Catholics, because that means that they were Catholics before the Reformation happened. So that means that they get to inherit them as part of the Christian tradition.
Right.
And so it's like, if you do it before the branch in history where the Reformation happened, then it's like everybody who is a Christian and therefore part of the Roman Catholic Church before that split happened, then you can sort of say, oh, well, they're part of the Protestant tradition just as much as they're part of the inheritance of the Catholic tradition. Catholics, of course, will disagree with this. That's kind of why they call themselves Catholic. Like, that's where the name comes from.
Well,
anyway, we're getting too much into religious history. But let me tell you something. Flannery O'Connor wasn't born in the Middle Ages.
Well, also,
so it's already a little bit of mental gymnastics.
Also, like, during the time when Flannery O'Connor is writing the stories that we all strongly love from her, she is going to Mass every single day. She was absolutely a Catholic. She was just a Catholic. She was not going to some special Catholic church that was different than the mainline Catholic churches. No, she was 100% just Catholic. And they just could not cope with that idea because basically, like, if you encounter something like this, then you potentially have to say, the person who taught me that all Catholics were just complete weirdos and nutcases, they must have been wrong.
Right.
And like, we do this thing so often where we turn the people who teach us things into idols in and of themselves.
Right.
And we can't, even though they're human and we should know they're human, we look at them as like, well, they're infallible.
Well, and then, okay, to build on what you're saying too, we also do it with the Flannery O'Connors of the world as well. So she gets instantiated as a little idol, a little statue that you can put on your shelf of untouchable, people that you're not allowed to criticize because they always wrote amazing stuff.
Right.
And so I want to pause here and tie this back to our thesis, because I feel like what we're talking about is a little bit complicated. So I want to repeat, maybe be a little bit repetitive in this episode. So the reason why we're sort of citing this as an example of how you can kind of propagandize yourself or how you can propagandize others is this is someone who is using the process of criticism, of engaging with literature, of engaging with the arts, not to discover the truth, but to reinforce their own worldview.
Yes, to force, basically to look at someone else's work and force it to tell them what they wanted to hear.
Yeah. And I think you said in that same vein, they had done something similar with Tolkien.
Exact same thing. They decided that Tolkien wasn't really a Catholic. Tolkien was a Catholic, guys.
Yeah.
It's
he
okay.
was a medieval Catholic to make him acceptable.
Yeah. Like when we just all need to step back and recognize that these people were Catholic. And you know what? Their work is still really good.
Yeah.
Their work is still really good. It does not negate their contribution. If you are not a Catholic, their work is not negated by the fact that they are Catholic.
Right.
Like we need to be in that space
where it's okay. Yeah.
I actually saw recently someone like did a Facebook post of like the most like evangelical live, laugh, love quote. I forget exactly what it was, but it was like so evangelical. And then someone stuck Tolkien's name on it. And I was like, no. Sir, absolutely not. That is okay. People didn't even talk like that back then. Like come on,
that's
man.
some 2010s internet speak.
So we just need to be okay.
Yeah. We don't need to bend reality to conform to our needs to such an extent that we have to lie to ourselves in these ways. Like, also, we can develop the skills and the tolerance to be able to encounter reality for what it is.
Also, like, it's okay to encounter something that kind of suggests that you might need to change your ideas a little bit, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to fall apart if it turns out Catholics aren't weirdos or any other thing that you've been told as a child that then turns out to not necessarily be true.
Yeah.
Like that is not going to make the underpinnings of the world come out beneath you.
Right. So we've talked a little bit about, an example of authors with a competing worldview and how this particular podcast kind of tried to wiggle it to make it fit and be more comfortable for them. Let's talk about a couple of examples where it's like biographical details from an author's life were not okay, and we had to kind of, here.
The one that I was actually involved in, because on this podcast, they were doing PG Wodehouse, and they did the Q&A section, and they asked listeners to send in questions. So I sent in a question about PG Wodehouse time as a prisoner of war in World War II, which I thought would be like a really interesting discussion because P.G. Wodehouse, is writing anti-fascist stories pre-World War II, then ends up a prisoner of war and in essence engages in something that most British people saw as collaboration and felt like he was a traitor. Right. And so I thought it would be like a really interesting discussion to look at those two. It, in fact, hurt their feelings that I brought up that P.G. Wodehouse was not a stellar human, which I was not trying to hurt anyone. I was just like, hey, this would be like a really interesting discussion. No, they got upset that someone would ask that question because it was like, I like P.G. Wodehouse, so he has to be perfect. Right. I can't face the idea that he wasn't.
That under extreme duress in a very difficult time, which for me, that sort of and everybody reacts to that reality differently, but that sort of makes me feel humble and say oh, what would I do if I were in those circumstances? Because am I really as brave as I think I am?
Right.
Am I really as honorable as I think I am? Do I really have the integrity that I think I would have in those circumstances? Because you don't really know until you're in a prisoner of war camp, frankly.
See how interesting the conversation could have been?
Yeah. And so, that's not to say that oh, we're here to talk about P.G. Wodehouse's critical failings in his moral character. It's to recognize that this is in fact part of what happens with humanity is under duress. We do things not even under duress. We contain contradictions. We contain multitudes. This is human nature. And
right. We don't need to... In order for us to enjoy someone's literature, we don't need them to be perfect. Now, we do separate that from, if what they're expressing on the page is highly offensive, we can say, oh my God, that's not cool. No. But in order for us to read someone's work and enjoy it, they also have to be perfect human beings. We can't ask that of people. That is way too much to ask.
Guess how many books will be on your shelf? None.
Yeah. And sometimes it is disappointing to face the fact that a piece of literature that you love was written by someone with flaws, but welcome to humanity.
Yeah. I mean, well, we don't need to get into it. We have a lot to get through. second example of someone with biographical details that were uncomfy.
This actually came up. A friend of mine was also listening to the podcast, and so I didn't see this, but she had seen this discussion happen on their Facebook page, I believe is what she said. They were reading Howard's Inn. Absolutely loved Howard's Inn, which I haven't read it, but it's a classic. Phenomenal. Yeah, it's a classic. There's no like debate as to whether or not Howard's Inn is good or not. That's not what we're discussing.
Yeah.
But E.M. Forster was a gay man, author, and this made the host very uncomfortable. And so, and also most of the readers, honestly, for the type of person that was listening to this podcast was uncomfortable with them reading a book by a gay man. And so the discussion apparently developed where they tried to make it be like, well, actually, there's no real proof that he was gay. And like, there would maybe some innuendo, but like, no, I would think we can't really say that. This man was in a 40-year-long relationship with another man. He was absolutely gay. And like, the idea that we can't like read this book unless we lie to ourselves, because it's the hosts aren't just lying for the sake of the people who are reading it. You can tell like this is lying to themselves because it's the only way I can enjoy this book if I tell myself it wasn't written by a gay man.
Right.
And that's just like, that level of dishonesty is not healthy.
Yeah.
Like you're not doing yourself any good by warping truth. You know, it's like the fact that E.M. Forster is gay does not change Howard's Inn. That's not how, that doesn't affect anything. You can still love Howard's Inn, but it doesn't do good things for your soul to be like, I'm going to have to lie to myself in order to enjoy this.
Right. I have so many things to say from my personal perspective on like Puritanism and how it's affected American culture, and even like Old Testament versus New Testament theology, and like this idea of contamination and the scapegoat in the Old Testament versus like Christology and the doctrine of salvation in the New Testament. But we can't go there, folks. We have too much to talk about, because unfortunately what they're actually operating with is like under an Old Testament kind of view that they themselves could be contaminated by sin or uncleanness or something like that, and then you don't have access to God. You can't enter the temple. Like that's kind of almost the framework that they're kind of operating their life around. And like there are Hasidic Jews with two separate kitchens, and you can live your life that way if you want to, but like they're almost doing it with like a contamination of ideas.
Well, and also like what they're doing is like they're taking kosher things and or unkosher things and being like, I'm going to lie to myself until this is kosher.
Right.
It's fine. I can lie to myself about this.
Pork sausage.
It's kosher.
So yummy.
Yeah. Like we're not even like refusing to engage in something because it's contaminated. We're taking the contamination being like, nope. It's not. It's fine. Like, I feel like there's an extra level. Like, we can get to, like, whether or not you can read something that has, like, a different ideology than you. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about lying to yourself about these things.
About, like, I am literally eating a Polish hot dog at Costco, pork, right now, for 99 cents. I'm pretending like it's an all-beef hot dog. I actually don't know if the Costco hot dogs are pork or not, but we'll just pretend.
We'll go off of that.
Yeah. And while also, ironically, being Protestants who should be under the law of salvation, under the law of grace, which adds just another layer of irony to this conversation.
This is just, I just feel like my main thing that I feel about this is like how unhealthy this is for the person who is doing this.
Yeah.
You know, because like you're just spending so much energy twisting and warping everything around you to try to make it fit into your worldview. Because like I totally get like these people are like a certain factor of like Christian conservatism. There's not a lot of good books in that range, you know, like there's just not a lot of good reading.
Well, and I would say like this very need is why it's hard to create good art under because, and this goes back to my conversation last month, which is that good art has to be given the room to explore. It cannot exist under the auspices of I am trying to deliver a single interpretation and message through this. And that's, again, that difference between propaganda and art, which is why we're having this conversation. You see how it all ties together?
It all ties together.
Okay, so we talked about people's worldviews that had contradictions to the reader's perspective. We talked about authors' biographical details that have uncomfortable elements to them that are hard for these readers to encounter. Let's talk about characters in books that represent ideas that are difficult for them.
I had a lot of like memory processing of like being the brief time I spent in the close reads.
Yeah.
And all of these things came back.
Close reads universe. Which like, my connection to this is that I used to do a lot of tutoring for conservative Christian homeschoolers. So I have also experienced talking with people who have this perspective.
And this actually all started because last month we talked about Westerns.
Right.
And I was talking about how I had encountered somebody in the I went back and searched the memories, and this was in their Facebook group for this, who was expressing disliking True Grit, the Western, specifically because the bad guy was not a traditional black hat bad guy. She was like basically what they're expressing here was that like anyone could end up a bad guy. And this makes me feel very uncomfortable. I don't like this feeling, and I'd rather you guys only read books in which the bad guys are bad guys.
Right.
You know, and it's like, to be that fragile that if you read a book in which a character is both a bad guy and not like the worst human being in the world, but
Like
maybe
it's a morally great character.
is somebody who clearly was not a bad human but made bad choices and ended up here, and that's frightening to you, like we need to look into the face of humanity a little stronger here.
Yeah, I mean, and basically what that person is saying is like, which is they're encountering the message of the book, which is that anyone can be in this position. Like your life could have unfolded this way, where choices that you made innocently enough early along actually breed consequences that are outsized in a particular direction that you had no idea that's where you would end up in life. And so she's this person, I'm assuming it's a woman.
Yes.
I think you said she, is like expressing a fear that like, oh, this might apply to me. This might give me insight about my own human nature, and an unwillingness to accept that about herself.
Well, and also just to be like maybe you can read a book and be like, I would never make that choice. That's totally fine. You can read, but to be like, I'm afraid to even encounter this idea, and so I only want to read books that reinforce the idea that like I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm the good guy, and everything is okay, and I'm never gonna make any bad choices. Like I feel like there's this fear in us to even encounter something that's slightly different than us, because we think that like we can't say no to things.
Right.
We have to take in everything.
Or even that like I just think about how many mistakes I've made and how many times I've had to say sorry, or how many times I've gone back and said, you know what, actually my views on this have changed. And it's like, man, that has been such a useful skill to develop. Right. Especially as you become a mature person and as you become an adult, you can have that retrospective to say, no, let me grow and mature, let me change. What I believed when I was 14 years old, I don't have to commit to now that I'm approaching 40.
Right. And like part of growing up is encountering other ideas and letting yourself think about them and either being like yes or no, or I'm just going to move on. But like we're so afraid to just encounter different ideas. Like we're refusing to even like to think about it. Like no, we like need to live in a stricture where we never even think about other things.
Yeah. When we were discussing this earlier, the phrase that kind of came to my mind is that like you're living in a monastery of your own mind, which is not to say that monks didn't encounter new ideas. They totally did, because they were the ones translating works of fiction that were coming out of the Middle East. So they were encountering it. But in that sense of like, oh, I'm going to absent myself from, the secular world and secular ideas, and give myself this protective cocoon where I'm not going to be tempted to even think the wrong thing or believe the wrong thing, right?
Right.
And so it's like putting these layers and layers and layers of protection between you and reality at the end of the day. And, what for me, that really represents treating yourself like a child and like not trusting yourself as a grown adult, which, it's like you have a TV and you've set the parental controls to PBS Kids only. And like, that's what you're allowed to, that's like the designated safe territory for you to be in.
Which, to be clear, we do when we have children, because children struggle to understand like what's coming at them. Is it right or wrong?
Yeah, you don't want to just have the horror channel, Friday night, Friday the 13th, like on repeat for a child.
But as an adult, we are capable of encountering new ideas, and it does not mean that like the world comes apart because we've encountered something different. Like that is, I mean, honestly, one of my like biggest moments is maturing as a reader that has resulted in me enjoying reading a lot more. As I read a book in which there was one chapter on a subject I disagreed with. And I was just like, I just don't agree with that one chapter. I still love the book. The book as a whole, I really enjoyed. There was a time when like my child version would have been like, oh, I have to stop reading this book because there's this one chapter that I don't agree with, and like now I can't like this book. But like as an adult, I'm like, hey, you know what? I don't actually agree with that one chapter, but the rest of the book is fantastic and I really loved it. And like that to me is like when I became more of a mature reader. And I also made it easier for me to just read stuff and enjoy it and not be like freaked out over every detail in this book has to align with my ideas. I read books all the time where I'm just like, you know, that subplot, I don't really agree with that. You know, like I was talking to you about a book that I read recently that I really enjoyed like 90% of the book. There was one subplot in which a character was shown to like take revenge on somebody and they just are fine. And that's just treated as like a choice we can make. And I'm like internally like, I don't agree with that. I think revenge actually damages your soul. And like it's not just a regular choice that humans make. That did not mean that I hated the book. The rest of the book I really loved. And I can say as an adult like, hey, I disagree with that one idea and that subplot. I don't think that's true. But the rest of the book was great and I loved it. And it's nothing is like shattering. I'm not suddenly like, oh damn, do I need to like enact revenge on somebody? You know, it's like as an adult, I'm like, no, I can just be like, yeah, I still don't agree that revenge is not good for the soul.
And it's just a very strange thing to need to manipulate and lie to yourself to the degree that these people are. You either or searching out for what you already believe by reading books that already agree with you, or ran into something that doesn't, so I have to kind of lie, manipulate, squeeze and squish and then it's like there's like an opportunity cost there too. Not only are you like propagandizing yourself in the way that we've been describing this whole episode, but you also like lose the opportunity. For example, for Tolkien, there's a very interesting way in which his Catholic theology comes through very strongly in The Lord of the Rings. We have moments of baptism. We have moments of the various sacraments kind of being represented in different moments in the story throughout the narrative. And it's like, well, if he didn't have this sort of like sacramental perspective as a Catholic, that would not be showing up in The Lord of the Rings. And if you have an inability to kind of see that his theology informs what he's writing, even with his own perspective about like how sin works and the ring is sort of like this icon or this representation of temptation towards sin, like then you're losing out on the richness of reading The Lord of the Rings on his terms.
The way he wrote it. Like I strongly believe that authorial intent is meaningful. Like this is actually sidebar a second here. I read someone recently read an article about who's the guy in the woods that they meet that's
Bombadil?
Bombadil. The title of the article was Tolkien says Bombadil is not God, but I don't care, he is. And it's just like, and I read this whole article and this guy basically being like, I don't care what
Tell me that you haven't read the Silmarillion without telling me.
like I think he's God, so therefore he is. And it's just like, that's not, because apparently Tolkien's on record being like, no, that's like Pan.
Exactly. And on top of that, like, we actually have the figure of God in this Silmarillion.
Like that is there. God does exist in this universe. It's not Bombadil, you know. But to be a reader, so basically, like, that's just arrogance to me to be like, I've decided that I know better than Tolkien, and that's God. So because I said so, and I disagree. To me, it's different than like, oh, you're looking at an impressionist painting and it means different things to million people than like a story that an author is writing and he's like, this is just Pan, and you're like, no, it's not. Like, no, that is not how we encounter literature.
It's like, can art means something in addition that the author didn't intend, because these things sort of unconsciously get all put together. Can a viewer or a reader bring to their own experiences that resonates and has similarities, and therefore it brings forth like, oh, it reminds me of these things? Yes, those are all legitimate ways to interpret a work. But when an author, you know, someone like Tolkien, who's written so prolifically about his own world, for where we have like textual evidence from the author sort of explaining his own world, you don't get that with most authors. First of all,
he had feelings, okay, and he expressed his feelings.
He wrote a whole, you know, the Silmarillion was never meant to be published. He wrote backstories and myths. He wrote letters to people about his world. Like there's a lot of content.
We know what he felt.
And so to just set that aside is like, okay.
Arrogance. That's called arrogance, sir. To the person that wrote that article, arrogance.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have to say, like, okay, well, why is you, not only would you, for that article to have like a legitimacy, which it already doesn't, is like, now you also have to answer the question of why he's not pan.
Right. Right.
Which I'm going to assume you did not do.
Well, also, like, I can't remember why it was so important to him that I think it was just like basically like, I want there to be a God in this story. And so I'm going to put him in wherever possible.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you can read a story without encountering a God figure. Like you can do this. Like it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay for you to not encounter whatever the story's like religious context is. Just read the book.
Right. Yeah. And okay, so now I want to transition to how this becomes really important to people. And I think this kind of ties back to True Grit, where this person is like very resistant to doing this self-reflection about their own human nature and their own identity. And I think a lot of it becomes so emotionally intense for these people is because they do incorporate it into their identity in a way that I don't when I read, you don't when you read,
right.
Where it's like, I let that book be an object outside of myself that I interplay with.
Just because you read it doesn't mean it becomes a part of your personality.
Right.
We can encounter things and that not leave an impression on us. I think there is like this idea that everything that we come into contact with leaves some kind of impression on us. But like, we're not 10 years old. We're big boys and girls.
Yeah.
We can read something and it doesn't affect us at all as people. We can just be like, oh, I enjoyed that or I didn't enjoy that. That was interesting. That wasn't interesting. You know, like we don't have to make it a part of ourselves because we engaged with it.
Yeah. And there are also books that have been extremely powerful. So it's like, on the one hand, it's like, do books have the power to affect the way that I see the world? Yes. And have they done that for me? Have they really changed my perspective? Yes. And the reason why that's frightening is because you don't want your position challenged.
Right. I mean, that goes back to like,
it's
like
not
the
even,
people who gave me my worldview are my idols.
And I can't shift. I can't move. I can't grow. I'm inflexible. I'm fixed. And to do so would be, you know, an inappropriate move. So, you know, I think it is both wanting to treat books and kind of having this hallowed position for them, which is great. I think books are great too. But you almost give them so much power over who you are.
Well, and when I'm talking about like books that like I can just read and enjoy and they don't affect me, like
it's like an Anne Rice vampire novel. Well, I don't now think that vampires are real. I'm not going to go join a vampire cult.
Yeah.
For example.
But like when I talk about like that, like I feel like people think I'm reading like these really deep, important books and then not being affected them. Like I know people who are terrified of children's books. Yeah. Like they can't encounter children's books because the ideas in them might be scary. And it's like in this worldview, everything is potentially going to rock your worldview when like there are a lot of books out there just exist to be entertaining and they're not going to hurt you.
Right.
You know, like I grew up in a context in which, you know, if a book had something witchcraft related, but for instance, like reading it meant that you were into witchcraft.
Yeah.
And
didn't that happen with like Harry Potter?
Harry Potter was a very, to this day, I know people who are like, oh, that person's into witchcraft. And I'm like, what do you mean? No one's into witchcraft. Like, no, they read Harry Potter. No, that does not mean they're into witchcraft. Yeah. That means that they read a book in which a fairy tale style book in which magic is real. No one who reads that book thinks magic is real. That is not the idea. And that's just like something that like, I, as like a mature reader, came into the realization because this was like so important to like when I was growing up that like people write books about paranormal stuff. They don't believe in that. Right. It's just a context the story is in to further the story they're doing. Right. No one who writes about witches believes that they are actually casting spells. Right. Like no one who writes about vampires believes there are actually undead people drinking blood. Like these things that we engage with in stories that authors use does not mean the author actually literally believes in them, and doesn't mean if you read them you also literally believe in it.
Right. And which is funny. It's like this level of sort of saying that if I connect with it, read it, and this kind of goes back to the E.M. Forrester thing. It's like an automatic endorsement.
Right.
It's like, you know, there now this like group of Christian readers are going, oh no, are you endorsing his gayness? And you're just like, no,
I'm just reading the book.
I'm reading the book, and he happened to have been gay.
Yeah.
That's neither here nor there.
Yeah, no one who reads a book in which there's a witch is endorsing witchcraft. Also, witchcraft is not real.
Yeah.
Like, that is another thing that, like, just, like, cracks me up about this, is when people are like, you can't read about this because blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you're pretending like magic is real.
Yeah.
Like, your concept behind this
Yeah.
is that magic is real, and we have a big problem here.
Right.
Because magic is not real. Astrology is not real. None of this is real, guys.
But vampires, we're pretty sure if we think might be, okay. The werewolf the vampire werewolf wars going on. That's
so for real. Yeah. I'm just gonna, like, step back and be like, if you accidentally read your horoscope someday, astrology is still not real.
Yeah.
Like, these things that we give so much power to, and it's just like, guys, they're not real. Like, it's just a story. These are literally just meant for entertainment, and nobody is selling their soul to Satan because they read this book.
And to kind of, like, piggyback on the question of, like, when you're reading a book that's just made for entertainment versus reading books that are more serious and maybe would challenge your worldview, like apparently, like, True Grit, for example, has the power to kind of, like,
True Grit is intending to challenge the ideas that are behind traditional Westerns.
Yeah.
Like, that's the intent behind True Grit, is to come in and look at the traditional Western and expand that worldview.
Right. And so then you, like, encounter that book, and it's like, you know what, if you don't want to take away this lesson that I might, as just a normal, regular, everyday person, have a capacity for evil, and I have to, like, look myself in the mirror and confront myself about that, like, that's okay. You also don't have to. If you are getting riled up and upset about it, you can say, you know what, this is not something that I'm ready to talk about or think about yet.
Right.
I've encountered ideas like that before that sort of, like, made me feel, ooh, and is like, oh, I just kind of observe it and go, oh, that's really interesting that I'm having that reaction to this book. That's kind of touching a nerve for me. I'm not really ready to talk about it or think about it yet, so I'm just going to shelf that for now.
Yeah.
But, like, I can observe my own emotions and my own reactions when things do challenge me.
Right. I don't think that you, like, instantly get on the internet and be like, don't read books like this. Don't be putting books like this in my world.
Yeah, and how dare you ask me to read it as part of the book club or something. It's like, no, that was, like, your personal reaction to it.
Yeah, like, most people read True Grit and don't think, am I about to become a criminal?
Yeah.
That's not the standard reader experience.
Yeah. And so when you make books have the power to define your identity, then it's like, well, yeah, no wonder suddenly the world of books become extremely dangerous.
Right.
And now you're full, the whole universe of everything that's been published, you're like, that's a pothole-filled road. Like, good luck navigating that. But if you can, like, divorce it from your personal identity, where it doesn't have to define you.
Yeah, it doesn't define you. It doesn't have to, like, every book you read doesn't have to change you.
Yeah.
Like, you can just, I think this is, like, the biggest thing for me is, like, when I was able to be a grown-up while reading books, I have enjoyed books so much more. I have read so much more. I've been able to, like my library has grown. And it's just been, like, so much more fun because I'm not constantly afraid that, like, I'm doing something wrong by reading this, or I'm doing something wrong by reading an author who's different than me. You know? Like, you can just experience books, and you, as a reader, can make the decision for yourself what you do and do not believe. But it's just not this constant struggle of, like, trying to find books that fit your worldview on every single point, trying to find authors that believe exactly what you want to believe.
Good
luck.
Know,
trying to
find authors who've never made mistakes.
Try and find them who have never made mistakes. Like you, in essence, you have to do what these people are doing, right? Like, you have to manipulate truth because those things just don't exist.
Right. You're going to have 0 books on your bookshelf.
Right. You're going to have a lot of really schlocky books that aren't worth reading.
I'm getting triggered by the books that I had to read for my homeschooling.
I did a very large, like, unhaul of books a couple of years ago that were, like, foisted upon me.
Yeah.
And I just remember, like, reading all of them being like, this was not good.
I feel so free.
This is not, I don't want to look at this on my bookshelf anymore.
Yeah. Well, and it puts you in this position where you just have to be so vigilant.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the capacity to trust yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now this gets into the point that I was thinking about, like, not talking about, but You just set it up on a tee for me.
Please take it away.
Yeah. So this was actually a recent revelation for me, which is like, whether intentional or not, early in my Christian like development, because I grew up in a Christian family, there was this idea that because I was a sinful person, I couldn't trust myself.
Right.
And there's a way in which when you divorce yourself from your own gut and your own judgment and your own like intuition, first of all, not a good thing to tell a child. You really want your child
to pay attention to that core thing that they say.
And say, if you don't feel safe, you trust that instinct and you come and tell mommy and daddy. We will be there for you. Because those are some of the like ramifications of when you're divorcing yourself from your fundamental trust for yourself.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the things that you really don't want in those circumstances to have be broken. And so then it's like, oh, well, then I have to have like what is okay handed down to me from authority.
An external source that has to tell you what's right.
Whether it's the pastor or the curriculum or the
thing is like the external source is as human as you are.
Right.
So you're trying to make and that just like goes back to it. Like where we want to pretend like we can't trust ourselves. Mm-hmm. So then we have to trust another source.
Yeah.
But we can't acknowledge this other source is also human and they make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And so then we end up warping everything around us and trying to make this work, when the reality is like, as humans, we do have a strong inner sense of like what's safe and not safe and what I am capable and not capable of,
right?
And like we are capable of a lot more than we give ourselves credit for. Right. And we constantly tell ourselves like, oh, I can't do this. I can't do that. I mean, this goes back to like what we brought up on the podcast about being in a bad romance with readers. Yeah. Where like the reason I read Ice Planet Barbarians was specifically because like my internal voice was like, you're not allowed to do that. Yeah. And I was like, darn it. At 39 years old, I can read whatever the hell I want and decide for myself what's right and wrong. Right. And not just constantly have this external voice saying like, you can't touch anything. Right. Like, no, I can read it and decide is it right or wrong. Yeah. I don't have to be told to not do anything.
Yeah. And I think, that's a very dangerous level of authority to usurp from a community, a body of people.
Right.
Like, and then you end up with these positions where it's like, not only do you kind of create this childism that we've been talking about, where grown people feel like they have to always be in the capacity of a child, sort of sitting under this level of authority that's being handed down to them. But like, that's some real cult adjacent stuff to me. That's all I'm saying is like when you never really sort of say, and especially in our culture where it's like, oh, well, here's where you've graduated and here's where you've become an adult, and I'm going to hand back to you the channel changer, and you can now watch other channels besides PBS Kids. Like that handoff of authority back to a grown adult person never happened in my church community, at least. There was never like a clear designation that like, oh yeah, now you can trust yourself.
Right.
We have,
Yeah,
we have done our best. We've trained you up. Train up a child in the way it should go, blah, blah, blah. But then like the transition never happens. Right. Where you say, okay, I'm going to hand off the baton of your own life back to you so that you can make your own autonomous decisions, right or wrong. It's like, no, the main thing is that you just never like mortgage your future in heaven. That's more important than you having your autonomy.
Right. Yeah.
That's like, salvation is the only thing that matters. Just don't end up in hell forever.
Which, again, that draws back to like the idea that something as simple as reading Harry Potter could endanger your soul. Yeah. Like that's when we make that be like the only thing we care about, then we make everything around us affect that. And it's just like, this is insane. Yeah. Guys, this is insane. You're not going to hell if you read Harry Potter. You're just not, okay? Yeah. That's just not what's sending you to hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Newsflash.
It's the fact that you become a criminal after you read True Grit.
Yes. Yeah. You're not becoming a criminal if you read True Grit, okay?
Okay, fine.
However, if you make lots of bad life choices, something might happen. And as a human, you are capable of making bad life choices. Yeah. That's the thing. And also, like, you need to face that. Yeah. Like, you as an adult actually do need to face the idea that I could potentially make mistakes that could lead me here.
Not only that you could, but that you probably have. And if you already have, then you also don't have, like, this is the other thing, is that you don't have the life skill to say, oops, or I'm sorry, or let me reflect on why I ended up making that choice and not do that again. Because the reality is that if you are a grown adult, you already have made mistakes. You already have been rude to somebody. You already have stated, you already have behaved selfishly in different situations. I know I have.
Because you
humans. Already have told lies. So if you can't look at yourself as having the potential for wrongdoing, then you certainly can't look at yourself in the face and take accountability for the wrongdoing that you inevitably are doing day in and day out, which means that you also don't have the emotional capacity to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. That was my bad. Right. And then it's well, how do you have relationships with people if your ego is so fragile? How do you have any kind of reconciliation when you inevitably wrong other people? Right. This is taking a whole nother turn.
Books are serious in ways that we don't understand.
And one thing that I did want to add here too is we're coming from this perspective, having both grown up in the church and having encountered certain types of ways of believing in Christianity and believing in God that framed people's worldview in this narrow way and in this very insecure way. Christianity is not the only worldview that is plagued by this capacity to propagandize yourself. Right. You can do this with anything.
Right.
It just happens to be the one we're familiar with.
We're familiar with this. We are familiar with people who do this. It's very, the examples are very easy for us to come up with this particular worldview. That's why we're doing it. But this is not just about the way that Christians or conservatives look at the book. This is about us as people looking at books and making bad choices and how we read them.
You can do that with any worldview.
Any worldview, yeah.
And so I think that is part of what it means to grow up, to transition from being an adolescent to a fully fledged adult. Is part of that process is sort of going over and saying do I agree with the politics, the worldview, the religion, the economic perspective that my parents believed in and therefore I was raised on,
right?
Or that my school gave me because I grew up in this political climate in this particular country with these particular worldviews.
Right. And
so even something is let's just take it out. In America, we just think democracy is the best, right? And that's how we're raised as students from within our school system. And it's okay to question that. I happen to still really like democracy, by the way. But that's another one that we can divorce from Christianity or religion. That gets seeded into you as an assumption.
Yeah. Which honestly, it is good to kind of question your own belief systems that you are given as a 100%. Children, because then do I believe this for myself or do I just believe it because I was told? You're going to feel a lot better about yourself if you know that you're choosing your belief systems and that it's not just something that's been handed down to you.
Right. And I think that develops that sense of I can trust myself to encounter difficult ideas and work through them and puzzle through them and come to a conclusion at the end. And that gives you the confidence to operate like an adult in the world.
Yes.
Which then gives you the flexibility within your nature to, when you do something wrong, be able to sincerely say, I'm sorry, and it doesn't devastate your whole ego and self-concept to the point that you're just crumpled on the floor,
Also, you can just it's a concept of you can have better relationships, but you can also have a better relationship with yourself.
100%.
You need to have a good relationship with yourself, and if you are constantly lying to yourself,
then you're betraying yourself. You already know that
unhealthiness that's going on the inside.
That's part of the reason why you probably feel feelings of distrust is you already know that you're lying to yourself.
Yeah.
And so how can that ever beget anything like trust? Of course you're betraying yourself constantly.
It's a hard place to be. Yeah. We know it's a hard place to be.
And it's all because you have to leave the idol untouched is really where it comes back to bring it back to the top. It's I can't even take that idol down from the top shelf to the second shelf.
Right. I can't acknowledge that idol is actually human. Yeah. Because the reality is if you are being asked to acknowledge that you are a human who can make mistakes, you need to be able to be okay, well, you're also a human who could make mistakes. You are not the only. I feel there is kind of this concept that you have to intensely focus on all of your own faults and not recognize that the person who's asking me of this is also a human.
Well, but that also goes back to that distrust of self is you have to put it somewhere. Yeah. So you need that other person to be perfect because you're already lying to yourself. You already know that you're not perfect. You already know that you mess up every single day. You've already divorced yourself from your instincts and from your ability to trust yourself. So you have to put all of that weight of what should be at least partially your own authority, partially listening to the people in your life who you love and trust, partially listening to teachers who you admire and that sort of thing for guidance, partially maybe engaging in a spiritual life that is important to you and resonates with what you believe. Like, you can distribute then that out that authority to a variety of things, including yourself.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you should just rely on your own self-judgment and screw what everybody else thinks. Like, that's also unhealthy. But like, then they have to like center it like a laser beam, like a magnifying glass of all of the sun on this like one spot of like, tell me who to be, tell me how to live,
what to think, what to feel.
Therefore, I can tolerate no imperfection in you because I have now, like, I have not distributed this authority around.
Yeah, exactly. You know? Like, it would damage the foundation if the person who taught me everything I know was maybe not right. Maybe about one thing. You know what? Okay, like, this is the thing. Like, oh, if mom is wrong about Catholics, that must mean I have to throw out everything. No. Like, maybe mom's just wrong about Catholics. Right. Like, we don't have to be like, well, because mom was wrong about Catholics, she must have been wrong about everything. Like, I feel like we operate in such extremes that we can never parse out that, like, mom might be wrong about one thing and right about the other. It's just like, oh, no, everything right, everything wrong.
I know. Mom's bolognese, though. That's right. She was right about the bolognese.
Your mom's sauce is still good, even if she's wrong about Catholics.
Yep. I think we should end it there.
I think that was a nice spot to land on. Let's all go have spaghetti now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys for listening to our ramblings and a bit of our sort of processing, a very emotional processing about some of the Christian cultural elements that came with our worldviews that we've had to really kind of parse through.
Yeah, and I just like want to bring it back to like the reason we're talking about this is that we hope that like people can just learn to enjoy books.
Yeah.
Like, we just want everyone to be able to enjoy books and read what you like and read what you enjoy and not feel bad about this or afraid of encountering things. Like, books are here for us to ultimately enjoy and to be in conversation with, and to like, books are a very social thing. Like, all of my friends are good readers.
We're being social right now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really what like we wanted people to take away from this is like just relax.
Yeah,
it's okay. Enjoy the book. Like, nothing's getting hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. You will survive. And also that like your life will ultimately become richer.
Right. Yeah.
Because you'll allow, there are many, many people who, in fact, I would say there's no one person whose worldview I 100% agree with. And there are many, many people whose certain aspects of what they think I strongly disagree with, but they have enriched my life deeply because of those areas where I have been able to like incorporate some deep truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all about these are the seasonings in the bolognese. We need variety of seasoning. You just can't go with salt. Salt isn't the only flavor you want in there.
Balance.
Yeah.
Balance.
So it comes back to the bolognese.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us.
We will see you next month.
Bye.
Bye.